The house had a specific kind of quiet after Arthur died. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, expectant stillness, like the pause between a lightning flash and the thunder crack. For 42 years, this house on Elm Creek Road had breathed with us. It knew the rhythm of Arthur's heavy boots on the hardwood floors he laid himself. It knew the scent of his Sunday morning coffee, dark and bitter, mingling with the sweet vanilla of my baking. When the heart failure finally took him on a rainy Tuesday in November, it felt as though the house itself had stopped breathing. I was 68 years old, and for the first time in my adult life, I was entirely alone. But the solitude didn't last long. Nature abhors a vacuum, and apparently so did my daughter, Vanessa. Vanessa was 32, a woman who had spent her entire life running away from the modest, careful life Arthur and I had built for her. She had always equated our careful budgeting with a lack of ambition, our contentment with mediocrity. She wanted shiny things. She wanted the kind of life that looked good in a magazine, or more accurately, on a glowing screen. It was less than a month after Arthur's funeral when her car pulled into the driveway. She didn't come alone. She brought Leo, her 8-year-old son from a previous disastrous marriage, and Liam, her new fiancé. Liam was 35, wore suits that looked a little too tailored, and possessed a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He had a firm handshake and a habit of calling me Eleanor, with a forced familiarity that made my skin crawl. "Mom, you can't be out here all by yourself," Vanessa had said, standing in my foyer, her designer luggage already piled by the door. She wore a pristine beige cashmere sweater that looked entirely out of place against the warm, lived-in floral wallpaper of my hallway. "It's not healthy. You're grieving. Liam and I talked about it, and we decided we're going to move in, just for a while, to take care of you." It sounded like an act of profound filial piety. To the outside world, to the neighbors who saw them unloading boxes, it looked like a devoted daughter rushing to her widowed mother's side. But I had been an auditor for the state for 30 years. I made a career out of looking past the numbers people presented to find the truth hiding in the margins. I knew my daughter. Vanessa didn't do things out of pure altruism, but looking at little Leo, peering nervously from behind his mother's perfectly pressed slacks, clutching a worn stuffed bear, my resolve crumbled. I couldn't turn my grandson away. Just for a while, I agreed. A decision that would become the defining regret of my twilight years. The invasion was gradual, a slow erosion of my boundaries that felt more like a shifting tide than a sudden flood. First it was the smell. The faint, comforting scent of Arthur's pipe tobacco that lingered in his study was systematically overpowered by Vanessa's expensive, suffocating lavender room diffusers. Then it was the kitchen. For 4 decades, that kitchen was my sanctuary. I knew every quirk of the oven, every creak of the pantry door. Within 2 weeks, my cast-iron skillets were relegated to a dark corner of the basement, replaced by sleek, non-stick stainless steel pans that Liam bought. "We're just modernizing, Mom," Vanessa sighed one afternoon, tossing a stack of my vintage floral tea towels into a donation box. "Everything in here feels so heavy, so old. You need a fresh start. We're helping you declutter your grief." She spoke to me not as a mother, but as a project, or worse, a patient. I bit my tongue. I told myself she meant well, but the decluttering soon extended to the memories of Arthur. The framed photographs in the hallway, pictures of our honeymoon in Maine, of Arthur teaching a young Vanessa how to ride a bike, of the day we brought Leo home from the hospital, started disappearing. "They were catching too much dust, Eleanor," Liam explained smoothly when I confronted them, casually leaning against my granite countertops, sipping an espresso from the machine he'd installed without asking. And honestly, the frames clashed with the new aesthetic Vanessa is going for. We put them in a safe box in the attic. You can look at them whenever you want. The new aesthetic. In my house. In the house Arthur paid for with sweat and double shifts. I was becoming a ghost in my own home, haunting the periphery of their vibrant, curated lives. I was no longer the matriarch. I was the eccentric, grieving tenant who needed to be managed. When Vanessa's friends came over for evening wine tastings, I was subtly encouraged to retreat upstairs. "Mom, you look exhausted," she would say, her hand warm but firm on my shoulder, steering me toward the staircase. "Why don't you go watch your shows? We're just going to be talking boring business anyway. You wouldn't be interested." I wasn't exhausted. I was being exiled. They were painting a picture for their social circle, the successful, benevolent couple, burdened with the care of a fragile, fading old woman. The only saving grace, the only tether to my sanity during those long, isolating months, was Leo. Leo was a quiet boy, deeply observant, carrying a sadness in his eyes that no 8-year-old should possess. He was the collateral damage of Vanessa's chaotic pursuit of status. While Vanessa and Liam were busy browsing catalogs for European furniture and planning their extravagant upcoming destination wedding, Leo would slip away. He would find me in the garden or sitting in the small sunroom at the back of the house, the only room they hadn't bothered to modernize. "Grandma?" he would whisper, poking his head around the doorframe. "Can we make the cinnamon cookies today? The ones Grandpa liked?" "Of course, my sweet boy," I would say, pulling him into a hug. He felt so small, so desperate for an anchor. We would spend hours baking, talking in hushed tones so as not to disturb the important work happening in the front of the house. Leo told me about his school, about how loud Liam yelled when his favorite sports team lost, about how his mother was always too busy on her phone to look at his drawings. In those moments, covered in flour, breathing in the scent of cinnamon and butter, I felt alive. I was protecting him, just as Arthur would have wanted. I endured the disrespect, the gaslighting, the quiet humiliations, entirely for the boy sitting on the counter, swinging his legs. But the tension in the house was a coiled spring, and Vanessa was winding it tighter every day. As the wedding, a lavish affair planned for the following spring at a coastal vineyard, drew closer, Vanessa's entitlement mutated into something darker. The requests for money started. First, it was a small loan to cover the deposit for the florist, because Liam's funds were tied up in investments. Then it was borrowing my credit card to pay for the caterer's tasting menu. "It's an investment in our future, Mom," she argued, defensive and sharp-edged when I hesitated. "Liam has big things coming. Besides, what are you doing with the money anyway? Letting it rot in a savings account? Dad would want me to have a beautiful wedding." She knew how to weaponize Arthur's memory when it suited her. I gave her the card, a sick feeling settling in my stomach. I was an auditor. I knew the look of a bad ledger. The math of their lives didn't add up. Liam drove a leased luxury car, wore imported shoes, but he didn't seem to have a concrete job. Only vague consulting calls that involved pacing the backyard and arguing in hushed, angry tones. The breaking point, the moment the final thread of my maternal denial snapped, happened on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 6 months after Arthur passed. Vanessa and Liam had gone to a cake tasting in the city, leaving Leo at school. I was cleaning the living room, a task I insisted on doing myself, despite Vanessa's complaints that I should hire a maid. I liked the physical work. It kept my hands busy and my mind from drifting into the dark corners of grief. I was wiping down the heavy oak coffee table when my cloth brushed against Liam's iPad. He had left it sitting on top of a stack of wedding magazines. I didn't mean to look. I am not a snooping woman by nature. But the screen lit up with a soft ding, displaying a banner notification. It was an email preview. The sender was a man named Marcus Thorne, a real estate broker I knew by reputation, a shark who dealt in quiet, off-market sales for desperate sellers. The preview text read, "Liam, the off-market listing for Elm Creek is ready. We have a quiet cash buyer interested in the lot value. They want to tear down and rebuild. Also regarding your other request," my breath hitched. My heart gave a painful, terrifying lurch against my ribs. Elm Creek, my house. The house I held the deed to. The house Arthur built. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. The screen went dark. I stood there in the silence of my living room, the smell of lemon polish suddenly sickening in my throat. I couldn't breathe. It felt as though the floorboards had turned to glass and were shattering beneath my feet. I looked around the room, at the bare walls where my photos used to be, at the sleek, cold furniture they had forced upon me. They weren't moving in to take care of me. They were staging the house. They were waiting for me to fade away, or better yet, they were actively plotting to remove me. I shouldn't have done it, but instinct, the cold, calculating instinct of a woman who had spent decades finding hidden assets and exposing financial lies, took over. I reached out and tapped the iPad screen. It wasn't locked. Liam, in his arrogance, hadn't thought a technologically illiterate old woman would ever touch his device. I opened the email app. My hands were shaking so violently, I accidentally clicked the wrong message twice before opening the thread from Marcus Thorne. I read the full email. Then I read the one before it, and the one before that. The cash buyer was offering $850,000 for the property, planning to bulldoze the home Arthur had painstakingly renovated. But it was the second part of the email, the other request, that made the blood freeze in my veins. Marcus had attached a PDF. The file name was assisted_living_options_out_of_state.pdf. I clicked it. It was a brochure for a series of state-run, low-tier nursing facilities in a rural part of Nevada, hundreds of miles away. Facilities with terrible ratings, places where the elderly were parked in wheelchairs facing blank walls until they expired. Beneath the attachment, Liam had replied, "Thanks, Marcus. The Nevada options look perfect. The cheaper the better. The old lady is getting increasingly confused and difficult to manage. We'll need to expedite the power of attorney paperwork before the wedding so we can finalize the sale of the house while she's settling into the new facility. Vanessa is on board." Vanessa is on board. The words blurred as a tear finally escaped, hot and stinging, trailing down my wrinkled cheek. My own daughter. The baby I had rocked to sleep in the very room above my head. She was planning to declare me incompetent, steal the home her father built, and ship me to a warehouse for the dying in the desert, all to fund a lifestyle built on lies. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. A strange, terrifying calm washed over me, starting at the base of my spine and radiating outward, chilling me to the bone. They thought I was just background noise. They thought I was a fragile, grieving widow, soft and yielding, waiting to be boxed up and shipped away like the old floral tea towels. They forgot who I was before I was just Mom. They forgot the 30 years I spent sitting across from corrupt contractors, lying executives and aggressive lawyers, tearing their financial lives apart line by line until they wept. I carefully locked the iPad screen, placing it exactly where it had been, precisely aligned with the edge of the wedding magazine. I walked into the kitchen, poured the cold dregs of the morning coffee into the sink, and washed my hands in scalding hot water. I looked out the window at the garden where Leo had planted marigold seeds just yesterday. They wanted to play a game of numbers and assets. They wanted to steal my legacy. I dried my hands on a towel. The grief that had been suffocating me for 6 months evaporated, replaced by a pure, crystalline focus. This was no longer about a mother hoping for her daughter's love. This was an audit, and I was going to balance the ledger. The morning after I found the emails on Liam's iPad, I made breakfast exactly as I had every day for the past 6 months. I scrambled the eggs softly, just the way Leo liked them, and poured Vanessa's almond milk into her overpriced temperature-controlled smart mug. My hands didn't shake. My breathing was even. When Vanessa padded into the kitchen in her silk robe, complaining about a headache and the incompetence of her wedding planner, I simply nodded and set a plate of toast in front of her. "You look tired, Mom," she noted, not looking up from her phone. "Did you not sleep well?" "Just the aches and pains of getting older, dear," I replied, my voice a placid, smooth lake hiding a treacherous undertow. I gave them exactly what they wanted to see. A woman shrinking into her twilight years, compliant and oblivious. But beneath that carefully constructed facade of the dotty, grieving widow, the auditor had woken up. And an auditor, above all else, respects the paper trail. My investigation began in the shadows of my own home. I knew Vanessa and Liam were careless. Arrogance breeds sloppiness, and they were the most arrogant people I had ever known. They threw away receipts from expensive dinners in the kitchen trash. They left bank statements sitting open on the dining room table, assuming the numbers meant nothing to a woman they deemed technologically illiterate. They were profoundly mistaken. Every night, after the house fell silent and Liam's obnoxious snoring echoed down the hallway, I would slip out of bed. I didn't turn on the lights. I knew the floorboards of Elm Creek better than the lines on my own face. I would make my way down to Arthur's old woodworking shop in the basement. It was the one place they never went. Too dusty, too working class for their refined sensibilities. Inside Arthur's heavy iron tool cabinet, hidden behind rows of rusted wrenches and jars of assorted screws, I kept a thick, green leather ledger. I had bought it with cash at a local pharmacy. Night by night, I built my case. I documented the $400 charge on my Chase Sapphire card for a bridal wellness retreat. I photographed the crumpled invoice from a bespoke tailor in Manhattan, where Liam had spent $2,500 on a tuxedo, a receipt I pulled directly from the pocket of his discarded trousers in the laundry room. I logged the subtle, recurring transfers from my joint checking account to a Venmo handle I didn't recognize. Small amounts, $50 here, $100 there, siphoned off like a slow leak in a tire. They were bleeding me dry, financing their fantasy life on the back of my grief. But I didn't confront them. You don't interrupt your enemy when they are busy making mistakes. I just kept writing in the green ledger, the columns of red ink growing longer, a damning testament to my daughter's greed. The tension finally fractured at their engagement party. It was late February, a bitter, biting cold outside, but inside the rented country club venue, it was an artificial summer. Liam had allegedly paid for the event, a lavish affair bursting with imported white orchids, a string quartet, and a champagne tower that looked like something out of a Gatsby adaptation. I wore my best navy blue dress, the one Arthur had bought me for our 30th anniversary. I felt like a museum exhibit, the dutiful elderly mother propped up in the corner to give the event an air of familial respectability. Vanessa was holding court near the ice sculpture, wearing a cocktail dress that cost more than my first car. She was on her third glass of champagne, her laughter a little too loud, her gestures a little too sharp. I watched as she introduced Liam's friends to her bridesmaids, seamlessly weaving lies about how Elm Creek was her childhood estate, that she and Liam were graciously renovating to preserve. I excused myself to get a glass of sparkling water, intending to retreat to a quiet corner. But Vanessa intercepted me near the patio doors. Her cheeks were flushed, and her eyes held a glassy, manic sheen. "Mom," she said, her voice dropping the sugary tone she used for the guests. "We need to talk about the guest list for Napa. The destination wedding, a vineyard in California." "What about it, Vanessa?" I asked quietly. She sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of profound inconvenience. "Look, Liam and I have been talking. The vineyard is very exclusive, very intimate, and the aesthetic we're going for is, well, it's young, it's vibrant." She took a sip of her champagne, not meeting my eyes. "And honestly, you've been so depressing lately. You just sit around looking sad. It brings the whole energy down." I stared at her. "You are saying my grief over your father brings your energy down." "Don't put words in my mouth," she snapped, her defensive edge flaring instantly. "I'm just saying a wedding is a celebration, and you're carrying a lot of dark, toxic energy right now. It's not good for my mental health. Or Liam's. We just think it's best if you stay here. We'll celebrate with you when we get back. We'll bring you a nice bottle of wine." A nice bottle of wine, in exchange for missing my only child's wedding. She braced herself, her shoulders tense, waiting for the explosion. She was waiting for the tears, the guilt trip, the desperate pleas of a mother begging to be included. She wanted the drama so she could play the victim to her friends, to show them how difficult I was. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the expensive fillers in her cheeks, the cold calculation in her eyes, the absolute absence of the little girl who used to hold my hand tightly when crossing the street. The maternal bond, frayed and battered over the last 6 months, finally cleanly snapped. There was no pain left, just a profound, chilling clarity. "I understand," I said, my voice perfectly level. Vanessa blinked, thrown off balance. You do? It's your wedding, Vanessa. You should have exactly the energy you want around you." I offered her a polite, entirely hollow smile. "Enjoy the champagne. I think I'll head home now. It's past my bedtime." I turned and walked away, my spine straight, leaving her staring after me with a look of utter confusion. I didn't feel heartbroken as I waited for the valet to bring my sensible sedan around. I felt liberated. She had just handed me the psychological permission I needed to stop treating her like my child and start treating her like a hostile entity. Monday morning, promptly at 9 a.m., I walked through the heavy glass doors of the First National Security Bank on Main Street. I bypassed the tellers and walked directly to the desk of David Abernathy, the branch manager. David was a soft-spoken man in his 50s who had handled Arthur's business accounts for 15 years. He looked up, his face breaking into a warm, sympathetic smile. "Eleanor, it's so good to see you. How are you holding up?" "I've been better, David," I said, taking a seat across from his polished mahogany desk. "I need to do a full review of my accounts. I also need to freeze the Chase Sapphire card ending in 4102. I believe it's been compromised." David's brow furrowed. "Of course. Let me pull up your profile." His fingers clattered across his keyboard. "We can certainly issue a new card. Did you lose it, or—" His voice trailed off. The steady clicking of his keyboard stopped. He leaned closer to his monitor, a deep crease forming between his eyes. "David?" I asked, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. "Eleanor," he said slowly, his professional demeanor slipping into genuine concern. "When did you initiate the HELOC?" The room seemed to tilt. The ambient noise of the bank, the hum of the air conditioner, the murmur of the tellers, faded into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. "The what?" I whispered. "The home equity line of credit," David said, turning his monitor slightly so I could see the screen, though the numbers meant nothing to my blurring vision. "Against the Elm Creek property. It was approved and disbursed 3 weeks ago. A draw of $150,000. $150,000. I gripped the arms of the leather chair so hard my knuckles turned white. My house, my safe harbor, the only thing I owned free and clear, the asset that was supposed to secure my final years, was carrying a massive mortgage. "David, I didn't take out a loan against my house. I own Elm Creek outright. Arthur and I paid off the mortgage 10 years ago." David's face went pale. He clicked furiously, opening a series of digitized documents. He printed them out and slid them across the desk toward me. "We have the application here, Eleanor. It was filed digitally, but the closing documents were notarized. It bears your signature." I looked down at the paper. It was a standard HELOC agreement, and there, on the bottom line, was my name, Eleanor Vance. But the loop of the E was too wide, the slant of the V too aggressive. It was a good forgery, good enough to pass a cursory glance by an underwriter, but it wasn't my hand. I flipped to the next page. A copy of a notary stamp, and attached behind that, a letter. It was on letterhead from a local physician I hadn't seen in 5 years. The letter stated that I, Eleanor Vance, was of sound mind, fully capable of managing my financial affairs, and enthusiastically undertaking this loan for home improvements and family gifting. I felt physically sick. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. On Liam's iPad, they were plotting to declare me incompetent to steal the house. But here, in the cold, hard light of the bank, they had forged a doctor's note claiming I was perfectly lucid, just so they could drain the house's equity first. They weren't just taking my money, they were weaponizing my identity. "Who is the co-signer?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly whisper. I already knew the answer. David looked at the document, his expression grim. "The funds were dispersed to a joint account held by you and Vanessa Vance Sterling. Do you want me to call the police, Eleanor? This is a severe case of elder financial abuse." I stared at the forged signature. My daughter had sat at my dining room table, drank the coffee I brewed for her, and methodically practiced stealing my life. She had pawned the roof over my head to pay for white orchids and an exclusive vineyard in Napa, a wedding she had just banned me from attending. "No," I said softly, looking up at David. The auditor inside me was no longer just awake. She was at war. "Not yet. Eleanor, if this is fraud—" "It is fraud, David, and I will prosecute it to the fullest extent of the law. But if I call the police now, Liam will vanish. The money is likely already moving offshore or into untraceable accounts." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. "I need you to freeze the joint account immediately. Flag the HELOC for suspected fraud internally, but do not, under any circumstances, alert the co-signer. Tell me exactly where that $150,000 went." David hesitated, torn between bank protocol and a decade of loyalty to my late husband. He looked at my face, saw the absolute terrifying resolve burning there, and nodded. He typed for a few minutes, the silence thick and heavy. $80,000 was wired directly to a luxury event planning firm in California, he read. The rest, $70,000, was transferred out 2 days ago in a wire to an offshore holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. Liam Sterling is listed as the primary beneficiary. I closed my eyes. Investments, Vanessa had called them. Liam wasn't an entrepreneur. He was a parasite, and my daughter had opened the door and offered him my veins. "Thank you, David," I said, gathering the printed documents and placing them carefully into my leather handbag. "I need copies of everything. The wire transfers, the IP addresses used for the digital application, the notary's information. I want the complete ledger." "What are you going to do, Eleanor?" he asked quietly as he handed me the thick manila envelope. I stood up, smoothing the front of my navy blue dress. I thought of little Leo, currently at school, drawing pictures while his mother sold his grandmother's safety out from under him. I thought of Arthur, whose calloused hands had built the walls they were now tearing down. "I am going to let them have their beautiful wedding," I said, my voice as cold as the February wind outside. "And then, I am going to burn their entire world to the ground." The drive from First National Security Bank to downtown was a blur of gray asphalt and bare winter trees. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence inside my sensible sedan was absolute, deafening, and necessary. For 6 months, my mind had been clouded by the heavy, suffocating fog of Arthur's death. But the fog was gone now, burned away by the harsh, fluorescent light of betrayal. I didn't go to the police station. The police were a blunt instrument. They would rush in with sirens and badges, the house would become a crime scene, and Liam, a man clearly accustomed to living on the slippery edge of the law, would vanish before the ink on the warrant was dry. Worse, Vanessa might take Leo and run, disappearing into the chaotic labyrinth of the foster system or some cheap motel out of state, leveraging the boy to keep me quiet. I needed a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. I needed Benjamin Harrison. Benjamin wasn't the kind of lawyer who advertised on highway billboards or shouted at the camera in late-night television commercials. His office was on the 3rd floor of an ivy-covered brick building that predated the First World War, tucked away on a quiet side street. The brass plaque beside the heavy oak door simply read, Harrison Estate Law. He was 65, sharp as cut glass, and possessed a quiet, terrifying competence. He had drafted Arthur's and my wills over 2 decades ago. His secretary, a stern woman named Mrs. Gable, took one look at my face when I walked in without an appointment and immediately ushered me into his inner office. Benjamin looked up from a thick stack of legal briefs, pushing his tortoiseshell reading glasses down the bridge of his nose. He took in my posture, the white-knuckle grip I maintained on my leather handbag and the rigid set of my jaw. He set his pen down slowly. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a low, calming baritone. "Sit down. Can I get you water? Coffee?" "I don't need a drink, Benjamin," I said, taking the wingback chair opposite his mahogany desk. "I need an executioner." Benjamin didn't blink. He simply leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Tell me." I opened my handbag and pulled out the green leather ledger I had meticulously maintained in Arthur's dusty basement workshop. I set it on the desk. Then I pulled out the thick manila envelope David Abernathy had given me at the bank. I laid the forged HELOC application, the fake notary stamp, and the wire transfer receipts detailing the movement of $150,000 next to it. "They put a mortgage on Elm Creek," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Vanessa forged my signature. She forged a medical competency letter. She and Liam took out $150,000 in equity. $80,000 went to their destination wedding in Napa. $70,000 was wired to an offshore account in the Caymans 2 days ago." Benjamin didn't interrupt. He didn't gasp or offer hollow platitudes. He pulled the documents toward him, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. For 10 agonizing minutes, the only sound in the room was the heavy ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner and the crisp rustle of paper. When he finally finished, he closed the file and looked at me. There was a dangerous, cold light in his eyes. "This is textbook elder abuse, Eleanor. Financial fraud, identity theft, wire fraud. It crosses state and international lines. It's a federal offense." "I know," I said evenly. "The bank manager wanted to call the police immediately. I told him to freeze the account quietly and flag it internally. If we move now, Liam runs. He takes the rest of the money and my daughter goes to prison while my 8-year-old grandson becomes a ward of the state. I will not lose Leo." Benjamin nodded slowly, a deep respect settling over his features. "You thought like an auditor, cold and rational. Good." He tapped the wire transfer receipt. $70,000 to the Cayman Islands. Liam claimed this was an investment? That's what Vanessa believes, or at least what she tells herself. "Let me make a few calls," Benjamin said, reaching for his desk phone. "I have a colleague who specializes in forensic accounting and offshore asset tracing. I want to know exactly whose pocket that $70,000 just landed in. Go home, Eleanor. Act normal. Give them nothing. I will call you when I have the whole picture." Acting normal was the hardest performance of my life. I returned to Elm Creek. The house smelled of expensive lilies, Vanessa's latest addition to her aesthetic. I walked into the kitchen where Liam was leaning against the counter, eating a crisp green apple and scrolling through his phone. He looked up, flashing that hollow, predatory smile. "Hey, Eleanor," he said easily. "Out for a drive?" You missed the caterer's call. We decided on the sea bass for the rehearsal dinner. With my money, I thought. You bought the sea bass with my blood and my bricks. How lovely, I said, pouring myself a glass of water. I'm sure your guests will enjoy it. I walked past him, feeling the phantom weight of the forged signature burning in my mind. Every time Vanessa complained about the stress of the seating chart, every time she rolled her eyes at me and called me a buzzkill, I pictured the green ledger. I pictured the cold, hard walls of a federal penitentiary. It made the bitter pill of their presence remarkably easy to swallow. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Benjamin. "Eleanor," he said, "come to the office. Use the back entrance. We have a lot to discuss." When I arrived, Benjamin wasn't alone. A younger man with tired eyes and a rumpled suit was sitting in the corner, packing up a laptop. He nodded to me and slipped out the door, leaving Benjamin and me alone. "That was my forensic investigator," Benjamin said, gesturing to the chair. "Eleanor, your future son-in-law is not an entrepreneur. He's not a consultant. Liam Sterling is a professional parasite, and he is drowning." "Drowning in what?" "Gambling debt," Benjamin said bluntly. "Massive, unrecoverable sports betting debt. The shell company in the Caymans? It doesn't hold investments. It's a pass-through entity used to wash money for an illegal offshore sports book. The $70,000 Vanessa wired him didn't go into a mutual fund. It went to keep a syndicate of very dangerous loan sharks from breaking his legs." The room spun slightly. The sheer scale of the manipulation was breathtaking. "He's broke," Benjamin continued, sliding a thin printed dossier across the desk. "He has no assets, no income, and a credit score in the low 400s. He targets women with access to generational wealth, isolates them, drains them, and disappears when the well runs dry. Vanessa was an easy mark because she was desperate for the lifestyle he projected. But Liam doesn't want Vanessa. He wants Elm Creek." "The off-market sale," I whispered, remembering the email on the iPad. "Exactly," Benjamin confirmed. "The HELOC was just a stopgap to keep his bookies at bay and fund this sham wedding to keep Vanessa compliant. Their ultimate goal is to declare you incompetent, force the sale of the house for pure cash, take the $850,000 and disappear. Liam will likely abandon Vanessa the moment the check clears." I closed my eyes. My daughter was a monster, yes. She was entitled, cruel, and profoundly selfish. But she was also a pawn, dancing on the strings of a man who viewed my family as nothing more than an ATM. She had signed her own death warrant just to impress the executioner. "What do we do, Benjamin?" I asked, my voice steady, stripped of all fear. "How do I protect Leo? How do I keep the house?" Benjamin looked at me for a long moment. Then he stood up, walked over to a heavy iron floor safe in the corner of his office, and spun the dial. The heavy locking mechanism clicked with a solid echoing thud. He reached inside and pulled out a single, thick manila folder tied with a red ribbon. It looked old. The edges were slightly frayed. "Eleanor," Benjamin said, his voice unusually soft as he returned to his desk and laid the folder between us. "How well do you think Arthur knew his daughter?" The question caught me off guard. Arthur loved Vanessa. He spoiled her sometimes, but he was a quiet man. He observed more than he spoke. "Yes, he did," Benjamin said. "Arthur was one of the most observant men I've ever known." He untied the red ribbon. Inside were the original copies of our estate documents, the ones I thought were finalized decades ago. But beneath them was a smaller sealed envelope. Across the front, written in Arthur's unmistakable blocky handwriting, were the words, "To be opened only if the worst comes to pass." My breath hitched. What is that? 5 years ago, Benjamin explained, shortly after Vanessa's first marriage fell apart, and she briefly moved back home demanding money to cover her credit card debts, Arthur came to see me. He sat exactly where you are sitting now. He was heartbroken, Eleanor. He realized that the greed he saw in Vanessa wasn't just a phase, it was a rot in her character. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. Arthur had carried that heavy, terrible knowledge alone, trying to protect me from the ugly truth of our own flesh and blood. He asked me to draft a secret codicil to his will in the family trust, Benjamin continued, picking up a silver letter opener and cleanly slicing the top of the envelope. He instructed me not to tell you, because he knew it would break your heart, and he stubbornly hoped he would be wrong. He hoped he would never have to use it. Benjamin pulled out a heavy watermarked document and slid it toward me. "This is a bad faith clause, Eleanor, a springing trust trigger. Translate that into English, Benjamin. It means, Benjamin said, tapping the dense legal text, that Arthur placed a conditional lock on the entire estate. If, upon his death, Vanessa ever attempted to misappropriate funds, commit financial fraud against you, or coerce you out of your assets. The moment she committed that act, she legally severed her own bloodline. I stared at the paper. Severed. The moment Vanessa forged your signature on that HELOC application, Benjamin explained, a sharp predatory smile touching his lips, she triggered Arthur's trap. By law, as of 3 weeks ago, Vanessa Vance Sterling is entirely disinherited. She gets nothing. Not the house, not the bank accounts, not a single cent. Where does it go? I whispered. It bypasses her completely, Benjamin said, his voice ringing with the finality of a gavel striking wood. The entirety of the estate, the house, the remaining liquid assets, everything, was automatically poured into an irrevocable trust for the sole benefit of Leo. And you, Eleanor, are the sole uncontested trustee. A sob tore out of my throat, raw and sudden. It wasn't a sob of grief. It was a sob of profound, overwhelming relief. Arthur. My wonderful, quiet, steadfast Arthur. Even from the grave, he had wrapped his arms around us. He had built a fortress to protect me and the little boy who loved to bake cinnamon cookies, knowing the wolf was already inside the house. We have them, Eleanor, Benjamin said gently, handing me a tissue. Vanessa thought she was stealing your house, but legally she just tried to steal from her own son's trust fund. That elevates this from standard elder abuse to a catastrophic federal breach of fiduciary duty. I wiped my eyes, sitting up straighter. The tears were gone. The auditor was back, but now she was armed with a sword forged by a dead man. So what is the next move? I asked. We let them go to Napa, Benjamin said smoothly, leaning back in his chair. We let them get on that plane. The moment they are in the air, I file the emergency injunctions. I submit the fraud packet to the FBI, the IRS, and First National Security. We freeze every asset tied to Liam's name. We petition the family court for emergency, permanent custody of Leo, citing the mother's impending federal indictment. And the house? I asked, thinking of the off-market listing. Ah, Benjamin smiled. That requires a bit of creative restructuring. To protect Elm Creek from being seized by the bank while the fraud investigation drags out, we are going to sell it, before they return from their honeymoon. I frowned. Sell it? To whom? To you, Benjamin replied. I am setting up an anonymous LLC, a limited liability company, in Delaware. You will use your private savings to purchase Elm Creek from the trust for the exact amount of the forged HELOC. The trust gets made whole, the bank's fraudulent lien is isolated and frozen, and Elm Creek legally vanishes into an impenetrable corporate shell that Vanessa can never ever touch. It was brilliant. It was perfectly ruthlessly brilliant. We weren't just going to stop them. We were going to obliterate the very ground they walked on. They leave for Napa in 4 days, I said, my voice eerily calm. They are leaving Leo with me while they enjoy their 2-week wedding extravaganza. Perfect, Benjamin said, closing the thick folder. Enjoy the quiet, Eleanor, because when they come back, they are returning to a graveyard. I stood up, leaving the green ledger on his desk. I didn't need it anymore. The accounting was finished. The debt was calculated. All that was left was the collection. When I drove back to Elm Creek that afternoon, the house didn't feel suffocating anymore. It felt like a trap, its jaws pulled wide open, waiting for the rats to step inside. Vanessa was in the living room, aggressively dictating seating arrangements to a stressed-out bridesmaid over the phone. She looked at me, rolled her eyes, and turned her back, dismissing me entirely. Go ahead, I thought, walking past her toward the kitchen to start dinner for Leo. Pack your designer bags, put on your white dress, drink your champagne, because the tab is coming due, and you have absolutely no idea how broke you truly are. The morning they left for Napa, the air in the house was thick with a frantic, superficial energy. The uber-black SUV idled in our driveway, its engine a low, impatient rumble beneath the bare oak trees. Liam was wrestling 3 massive silver Rimowa suitcases into the trunk, luggage bought, undoubtedly, with the equity they had stolen from my walls. He was sweating despite the chill, checking his gold Rolex every 30 seconds. He looked less like a groom heading to his destination wedding and more like a grifter making a hurried getaway. Vanessa stood in the foyer, wearing oversized designer sunglasses and a camel hair coat draped over her shoulders. She was furiously typing on her phone, barking clipped orders at her maid of honor through a voice note. Leo sat on the bottom step of the staircase, hugging his knees to his chest. He was wearing his favorite faded superhero t-shirt, looking small and entirely forgotten in the hurricane of his mother's vanity. Vanessa finally slipped her phone into her purse and looked around, her eyes landing on me. "All right, Mom," she said, her tone brisk, devoid of any genuine warmth. "We're out of here. The flight to San Francisco leaves in 3 hours, and Liam wants to hit the first-class lounge." She didn't hug me. She stepped forward and kissed the air near my left cheek, leaving a faint scent of expensive synthetic jasmine. "Leo's schedule is on the fridge," she instructed, pointing a manicured finger toward the kitchen. "Don't let him stay up past 9, and please try not to feed him too much sugar. He gets hyper. And Mom?" She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly behind the dark lenses. "Please don't mess with the thermostat or rearrange anything while we're gone. Liam likes the house exactly the way it is." Liam likes the house. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the statement almost made me laugh. "Don't worry about a thing, Vanessa," I said, folding my hands neatly in front of me. "Everything will be exactly where it belongs when you get back." "Great. Bye, Leo. Be good for Grandma." She waved a hand vaguely in his direction without waiting for a response, turning on her heel and marching out the front door. Liam slammed the trunk shut, offered me a 2-finger salute, and slid into the passenger seat. I stood in the doorway and watched the black SUV back out of the driveway, turn down Elm Creek Road, and disappear around the bend. The taillights vanished, the rumble of the engine faded, and then there was silence. It wasn't the heavy, expectant stillness that had haunted the house after Arthur died. This was a clean, sharp silence. It was the sound of a tumor being excised. I closed the heavy front door and engaged the deadbolt. The lock clicked with a satisfying metallic finality. I turned and looked at my grandson. He was still sitting on the stairs, staring at the door. "Are they gone, Grandma?" he asked quietly. "They are, my sweet boy," I said, walking over and sitting on the step next to him. I wrapped my arm around his small shoulders, pulling him close. "It's just you and me now. For the next 2 weeks, this is our kingdom." He looked up at me, a tentative, hopeful smile breaking through the sadness in his eyes. "Can we make the cinnamon cookies?" "We are going to make the cinnamon cookies," I promised him, kissing the top of his head. "But first, Grandma has to do a little bit of spring cleaning." The moment I got Leo settled in the den with a movie and a bowl of popcorn, my transformation was complete. The grieving widow vanished, replaced entirely by the auditor. My first stop was the living room. I walked over to the sleek, stainless steel lavender diffusers Vanessa had plugged into every outlet. I yanked them from the walls, one by one, throwing them into a black garbage bag. I opened the windows, letting the crisp, biting winter air flood the rooms, flushing out the cloying scent of their entitlement. I went to the basement, retrieved my heavy cast-iron skillets, and placed them squarely back on the stove where they belonged. I marched up to the attic, hauled down the cardboard box labeled Old Decor, and spent the next hour hanging Arthur's photographs back on the walls. The house was breathing again. At exactly 1 o'clock, the doorbell rang. It was Benjamin Harrison. He didn't come in a suit. He wore a heavy wool peacoat and carried a thick leather briefcase. He stepped inside, took off his hat, and looked around the hallway. His eyes landed on a framed photograph of Arthur and me in Maine. "The house looks like itself again, Eleanor," he noted, a small smile playing on his lips. "It's just the beginning, Benjamin. Let's go to the dining room." We sat at the long mahogany table. Benjamin unclasped his briefcase and withdrew a stack of legal documents that must have been 3 inches thick. He arranged them in precise, meticulous piles. "The Delaware LLC is fully incorporated," Benjamin said, sliding the first document toward me. "Named Marigold Holdings, per your request." I smiled softly. Leo had planted marigolds in the garden. It was a fitting name for the entity that would shield his future. "Your private savings account, the one Arthur insisted you keep separate from the joint household funds, has the exact liquidity we need," Benjamin continued, handing me a sleek silver pen. "You are purchasing Elm Creek from Arthur's trust for $150,000. The exact amount of the fraudulent HELOC. I took the pen. "And this completely legally isolates the property?" "Ironclad," Benjamin confirmed. "Because Vanessa triggered the bad faith clause when she forged your name, the trust immediately stripped her of all rights and transferred equitable title to Leo, with you as the sole trustee. By selling the house to Marigold Holdings, you are shielding the physical asset from the bank's inevitable attempt to collect on the fraudulent loan. The trust gets the cash to hold for Leo, the bank gets a frozen account, and Marigold Holdings, which is just you, owns Elm Creek free and clear. Vanessa cannot touch it, Liam cannot leverage it, and the bank cannot foreclose on it. I didn't hesitate. I pressed the pen to the heavy paper and signed my name. Eleanor Vance. Not the shaky, aggressive forgery my daughter had practiced, but my real signature. Steady, deliberate, and final. I signed page after page. Deeds of transfer, corporate resolutions, trustee authorizations. With every stroke of the pen, I was dismantling the fantasy world Vanessa and Liam had built on my back. Done, Benjamin said, gathering the papers and tapping them into a neat stack. The wire transfer from your private account to the trust will clear by 5 p.m. today. Marigold Holdings is now the legal owner of this estate. He pulled out a second, thinner folder. The cover bore the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, alongside a thick packet from First National Security Bank. This, Benjamin said, his voice dropping an octave, is the kill shot. I looked at the packet. It contained the IP addresses, the forged medical letter, the fraudulent signature, and the wire traces leading directly to Liam's illegal offshore sportsbook. David Abernathy at the bank has been instructed to lock the joint account the moment the ceremony in Napa concludes, Benjamin explained. He is submitting the internal fraud report simultaneously. I am overnighting this packet to a contact I have at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in the morning. They take wire fraud exceeding $100,000 very, very seriously, Eleanor, especially when it involves offshore money laundering. How much time are they facing? I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. For the forgery, elder abuse, and wire fraud, Vanessa is looking at 5 to 8 years in a federal penitentiary if she doesn't cooperate. Liam, with his history in the offshore gambling syndicate, he's looking at a decade, minimum. I looked out the window at the bare oak trees. My own daughter. I had packed her lunches, braided her hair, and sat up with her when she had a fever. And now I was authorizing a federal indictment against her. The tragedy of it was a heavy stone in my chest, but it was outweighed entirely by the fierce, protective instinct I felt for the little boy watching cartoons in the next room. She had made her choice the moment she picked up that pen and signed my name. Send it, Benjamin, I said. Over the next 10 days, I lived in a bizarre, split-screen reality. In my physical world, Elm Creek was a haven of peace. Leo and I baked cookies, built elaborate forts out of sofa cushions and Arthur's old flannel blankets, and read books by the fireplace. For the first time in his life, Leo wasn't walking on eggshells. He laughed louder, slept deeper, and the anxious shadow that usually clouded his eyes began to lift. But in the digital world, I watched a spectacular, fraudulent theater unfold. I didn't follow Vanessa on Instagram, but I didn't have to. She had a public profile, and her feed was a relentless, curated broadcast of her own delusion. Every evening, after Leo went to bed, I would sit at the kitchen island with a cup of tea and pull up her page on my tablet. Day 3. A photo of Vanessa and Liam lounging on a private yacht in San Francisco Bay, holding crystal flutes of champagne. The caption read, "Pre-wedding bliss with my forever. #blessed, #Sterling, Dynasty, #self-made." I looked at the hashtag. Self-made. I traced the rim of my teacup, thinking of the $150,000 hole in my bank account. Day 6, the rehearsal dinner. They had rented out a Michelin-starred restaurant nestled in the vineyards. Vanessa wore a custom silk slip dress. The tables were groaning under the weight of imported caviar and rare wines. A video clip showed Liam giving a toast, his teeth gleaming white, raising a glass to the beautiful life we've built together. I paused the video on Liam's face. You are standing on a trapdoor, I thought, and you don't even hear the hinges squeaking. Day 8. The wedding. The photos were undeniably stunning. The backdrop was a rolling valley of green vines under a cloudless California sky. Vanessa walked down the aisle in an $8,000 Vera Wang gown, the train sweeping over the manicured grass. Liam stood at the altar in his bespoke tuxedo, looking like a prince in a fairy tale. There was a beautifully staged photo of the bridal party, but there was no mother of the bride. She had cited my toxic energy as the reason for my absence. But looking at the photographs, I knew the real reason. I was the ghost of her guilt. She couldn't look me in the eye while standing in a dress paid for by my stolen security. She posted a reel of their first dance under a canopy of fairy lights. The caption was a single dramatic line: "We took what was ours." I closed the tablet. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. She had no idea how prophetic those words were about to become. The morning after the wedding, my phone rang. "It's done," Benjamin said. He sounded tired but deeply satisfied. David Abernathy dropped the hammer at 8 a.m. Pacific time. The joint account is frozen tight. The credit cards are locked. The HELOC has been officially flagged as a stolen asset. And the FBI? The package landed on Special Agent Miller's desk an hour ago. He reviewed the IP logs and the fake notary stamp. He's opening a formal case file today. They are tracing the Cayman wire now. I exhaled a long, shaky breath. So what happens to them now? Now, Benjamin said, a dark amusement coloring his tone. They are in Napa Valley, staying in a $5,000 a night honeymoon suite, and they have absolutely no money to pay for it. They are holding dead plastic. I hung up the phone and walked into the living room. Leo was sitting on the rug, carefully coloring a picture of a house. "Look, Grandma," he said proudly, holding it up. He had drawn Elm Creek, but instead of the sterile, modern lines Vanessa preferred, he had drawn it with smoke coming out of the chimney and bright yellow flowers in the front yard. "It's beautiful, Leo," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I knelt down beside him. "Do you like it here? Just you and me?" He nodded vigorously. "It's quiet, and nobody yells. Nobody is ever going to yell at you in this house again," I promised him, looking him directly in the eyes. "This is your home, forever." The trap was fully set. The paperwork was filed. The money was secured. The only thing left to do was wait for the honeymoon to end and for the bride and groom to fly home to the graveyard they had dug for themselves. I knew the exact moment reality caught up to them. It wasn't a phone call from the FBI. It was a text message arriving at 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday night, 2 days before they were scheduled to fly back. It was from Vanessa. Just 3 words. "Mom, call me." I stared at the glowing screen in the dark of my bedroom. I didn't call her. I turned the phone on silent, rolled over, and for the first time in 6 months, I slept through the night without waking up once. The morning after Vanessa's frantic late-night text, my phone screen looked like the dashboard of a crashing airplane. 32 missed calls, 14 text messages, 3 voicemails. I sat at the kitchen island, sipping my Earl Grey tea, and watched the notifications roll in. The progression of her texts was a fascinating study in the psychology of panic. 8:15 a.m. "Mom, call me immediately. Something is wrong with the Chase card. The hotel is trying to run the final bill and it's declining." 9:30 a.m. "Mom, pick up your phone. I called the bank and they said the account is frozen for security reasons. You need to verify it." 11 a.m. "Eleanor, this is Liam. The resort manager is threatening to call the local police if we don't settle the $12,000 folio. Wire us the money now. 1:45 p.m. Mom, please." Liam is screaming at me. His cards are declining too. How are we supposed to get to the airport? "Mom, are you there?" They had booked their first-class return flights months in advance, which was the only reason they weren't entirely stranded in California. I didn't reply to a single message. I simply forwarded the voicemails to Benjamin Harrison. "Let them sweat," Benjamin told me when I called him later that afternoon. Liam had to beg one of his shady associates back home to wire the hotel directly just so they could check out without being arrested. "He is bleeding, Eleanor, and the sharks are circling." The post-wedding brunch was scheduled for Sunday morning at the Oak Ridge Country Club, a lavish local venue where Vanessa intended to flaunt her new marital status to the friends and extended family who couldn't make the trip to Napa. It was supposed to be her victory lap. I made sure Leo was dressed in his Sunday best, a crisp white button-down and a little navy blazer. He looked handsome, his eyes bright and clear. The shadows that used to live under his eyes had completely vanished over the past 2 weeks. "Are we going to a party, Grandma?" he asked as I straightened his collar. "We are going to a very important meeting, Leo," I told him gently. "And after that, you and I are going to get ice cream. A double scoop." Benjamin Harrison picked us up in his sleek black town car at exactly 10:30 a.m. He was dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, carrying a slim leather portfolio. He looked less like an estate lawyer and more like a grim reaper carrying a ledger. When we arrived at the Oak Ridge Country Club, the brunch was already in full swing. The rented ballroom was awash in natural light, filled with the clinking of mimosa glasses, the soft hum of a jazz trio, and the loud, forced laughter of the local elite. Vanessa was holding court near the extravagant buffet. She was wearing a white silk jumpsuit, a heavy diamond tennis bracelet flashing on her wrist. But the aesthetic was cracking. Her smile was brittle, her eyes darting nervously toward the entrance every few seconds. Liam stood beside her, his jaw tight, nursing a scotch on the rocks at 11 in the morning. He looked like a man standing on a landmine, terrified to shift his weight. Benjamin, Leo, and I walked through the double mahogany doors. The reaction was immediate. A hush rippled through the room, starting at the entrance and spreading toward the buffet like a wave. Glasses stopped mid-air. Conversations abruptly died. Vanessa's friends, the ones who had dutifully liked her posts about her toxic mother, stared at me in stunned silence. Vanessa froze. The color drained from her face so fast she looked ill. Liam's head snapped toward us, his eyes locking onto Benjamin's leather portfolio. He recognized a lawyer when he saw one. I didn't storm the room. I didn't shout. I walked slowly, deliberately, the heels of my sensible pumps clicking rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor. I held Leo's hand loosely in mine. The crowd parted for us like the Red Sea. I stopped 3 feet from Vanessa. "Mom," she breathed, her voice a fragile, trembling thing. What are you doing here? You weren't invited." "I am the mother of the bride," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the dead silent room. "I came to give you your wedding gift." Liam stepped forward, attempting to puff out his chest, though his eyes betrayed his absolute panic. "Eleanor, this is highly inappropriate. We are dealing with a massive banking error right now, and you showing up here to cause a scene—" "There is no banking error, Liam," I interrupted, my tone as cold and hard as a diamond. I turned to Benjamin. He unclasped the leather portfolio. He didn't hand the envelope to Vanessa. He handed it to Liam. "What is this?" Liam demanded, though his hands were shaking as he took it. "That," Benjamin said, his baritone voice echoing in the quiet ballroom, "is a courtesy copy of the federal indictment currently being drafted by the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. It details a fraudulent home equity line of credit taken against the Elm Creek property, utilizing forged signatures and a falsified medical competency affidavit." A collective gasp swept through the room. One of Vanessa's bridesmaids literally dropped her mimosa. The glass shattered against the floor, a sharp, violent sound, but nobody looked away. Vanessa staggered back a step, bumping into the buffet table. Mom, what are you saying? I don't—" "You practiced my signature, Vanessa," I said, looking her dead in the eye. I didn't raise my voice. The quietness of my fury was far more terrifying than any scream. "You sat at my dining room table and practiced stealing my life. You pawned the house your father built to buy that Vera Wang dress. And you thought I was too old, too stupid, and too grieving to notice." Liam ripped open the envelope. His eyes scanned the documents, the bank trace, the IP logs, the copy of the forged HELOC. But it was the last page that made his breath catch audibly. "The Caymans," Liam whispered, his face turning an ashen, sickly gray. "Yes," Benjamin noted calmly. "The $70,000 you attempted to launder offshore to pay your gambling debts. The FBI has frozen that account, Mr. Sterling. The syndicate you owe money to is not going to be paid, and the federal government is going to want a word with you about wire fraud." The trap snapped shut, and just as Benjamin had predicted, the parasite immediately tried to detach itself from the dying host. Liam didn't try to deny it. He didn't try to protect his wife of less than 48 hours. His survival instinct kicked in, raw and ugly. He threw the papers onto the buffet table, knocking over a silver tray of pastries, and turned on Vanessa with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You crazy bitch!" Liam roared, his voice cracking with panic. He pointed a shaking finger at Vanessa, backing away from her. "She did it! Eleanor, I swear to God I thought she had the money. I thought it was her trust fund. She told me she was the sole heir. I didn't know she forged your name on the mortgage." Vanessa stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "Liam, what? You told me to do it. You said we needed the cash for Marcus Thorne. You gave me the doctor's letter." "I don't know what you're talking about," Liam shouted, looking around at the horrified faces of the guests, desperate for an ally that didn't exist. "You're a liar and a thief. I am filing for an annulment tomorrow morning. I am not going to federal prison because you have a shopping addiction." Twist 5. The ultimate betrayal. There is no honor among thieves, and there is certainly no love in a marriage built on a stolen foundation." He didn't look back. Liam turned and practically sprinted for the exit, shoving past the country club manager, abandoning his bride, his debts, and the wreckage of his grand con. Vanessa was left standing alone, surrounded by the shattered glass and the condemning stares of every single person she had tried to impress. She looked at me, tears finally spilling over her mascara, streaking her face with black lines. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. She looked exactly like the terrified, selfish little girl she had always been. "Mom, please," she sobbed, taking a step toward me, reaching out a trembling hand. "Please, I'm your daughter. You can't let them send me to jail. Please, Mom, I'll give it all back. I'll sell the jewelry. Just call the bank and tell them it was a misunderstanding." I looked at her hand. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no maternal ache. The woman standing in front of me had died the moment she typed "Vanessa is on board" in an email planning to lock me in a dilapidated nursing home. "You can't give the house back, Vanessa," I said softly, "because you don't own it. Arthur's trust explicitly stated that any act of financial betrayal on your part would result in your immediate, irrevocable disinheritance." Her eyes widened in horror. "Dad's trust? Well, the house belongs to Leo now," I continued, squeezing my grandson's hand. "I purchased it from the trust through a private LLC. The money you stole from the bank? That debt belongs entirely to you. You are going to have to explain to the federal judge how you plan to pay it back." You set me up," she whispered, her legs giving out. She collapsed onto the floor, the white silk of her jumpsuit pooling around her like a surrendered flag. "You let me go to Napa." "I let you show me exactly who you are," I corrected her. "And now I am showing you who I am." I didn't wait for her to start screaming. I didn't wait for the inevitable police sirens. I had delivered the audit, and the ledger was finally balanced. I turned my back on my daughter, took Benjamin by the arm, and walked out of the Oak Ridge Country Club, stepping out into the bright, crisp afternoon sunlight. "Grandma?" Leo asked softly as we climbed into the back of the town car. He hadn't fully understood the legal jargon, but he understood the shift in the universe. He understood that the bad things were over. "Are we going home now?" "Yes, my sweet boy," I smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached all the way to my eyes. "We are going home. And then we are going to get that double scoop of ice cream." 6 months later, the summer sun was setting over Elm Creek Road, casting a golden, honeyed light across the hardwood floors. The house was alive again. The lavender diffusers were in a landfill. My cast-iron pans were well-seasoned and resting on the stove. The heavy oak frames holding Arthur's memory watched over the hallway. Vanessa pleaded guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of elder abuse. In exchange for her testimony against Liam's offshore syndicate, the judge gave her 4 years in a minimum security federal facility in upstate New York. Liam wasn't so lucky. The FBI raided his associates, and he was currently awaiting trial without bail, facing a decade behind bars. I was granted full, permanent custody of Leo. I was sitting in the sunroom, drinking a cup of tea, watching out the window. Leo was in the garden, his hands covered in dirt, carefully watering a bright, vibrant row of marigolds he had planted himself. He was laughing at something a neighbor's dog was doing by the fence. I took a sip of my tea. The victory hadn't come without a cost. I had lost a daughter, but the truth was, I had lost her a long time ago. The girl I loved had been consumed by the woman she chose to become. I couldn't save her. But as I watched Leo wipe his forehead with the back of his muddy hand, looking exactly like Arthur used to when he worked in the yard, I knew I had saved the only thing that mattered. Sometimes, to save the roots of a family tree, you have to be willing to cut off the rotting branches. I had wielded the saw, and now, in the quiet peace of my own home, the remaining branches were finally beginning to bloom.